We're seeing the rise of the house church. Which,
well, let's talk about that, because you're a proponent of what you describe as open Christianity.
mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
It looks a lot different from your standard Sunday service, yes.
Shockingly different, some
yes.
people might say.
There's no special building with a steeple on it.
Okay.
There's no paid pastor. We have pastors, people who have a heart for people.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, surveys show that about 10% of the people in the church around the world have some sort of gift of pastoring. It doesn't mean they're prepared to be professional pastors of a 2,000-member church. But they have a heart for people who know the Word, which is the basics. The churches are run by elders, of which there's usually 2 or 3 in a typical house church of 10, 15, 20 people. And so we meet in homes, or we meet in Starbucks. Do you have Starbucks up here?
We have
Okay.
Starbucks, yes, Starbucks is everywhere.
And we meet in shops and offices and on campuses. It's all open Christianity. The biggest manifestation is the house church, where people are elbowing for room on a sofa instead of in a pew somewhere. And it's very natural. It's very much like Acts 2, where they were going from house to house and sharing in the apostles' teaching and the prayers and everything. So it's a return to basic Christianity. It's not some newfangled idea that Jim Rutz came up with.
Well, I know that there are going to be many people who are watching and saying, hey, it's not church. If you don't have a church building, if you don't have a full-time pastor, if you don't listen to a sermon on Sunday, well, I don't know what that is, but that's not church.
Well, 2 or 3 people eating cold pizza in the kitchen at 12 o'clock at night, that's church to me. And it's church scripturally, because Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there. So all you need for church is 2 humans and 1 Jesus, and you have church.
Right. What are the advantages of this kind of house church philosophy?
You say we got 3 hours today?
You know?
First is the freedom, because nobody is telling you to sit down and shut up and sit over there or whatever. You're expected to talk. You're expected to participate. And so, in fact, if you don't participate, somebody's going to be saying, Rhonda, you're kind of quiet today. What's been going on in your life this last week? And so it's almost mandatory participation. And then there's the empowerment, because if you're feeling weak or something, people are going to be praying for you that you would be able to grow in your gifting. I don't remember if I told you yesterday, a friend of mine named Jean was visiting a house church, and she had a shattered ankle. Okay,
no.
Well, she went to a house church meeting, Pueblo, Colorado. And the time came when somebody said, well, let's pray for Jean's ankle. She was facing an operation for this really badly shattered ankle, and it wasn't looking too good. And a little 2-year-old boy named Moses came walking across the room, put his little 2-year-old hands around her ankles, and all the bones snapped right back into place.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 years old. So we don't exclude anybody. Typically, if kids get bored, they'll drift out into another room or in the backyard or wherever. But we don't exclude anybody, so there's a tremendous amount of empowerment. And there are solutions for your problems. Most Christians, if you get to know them at 20 years old and see them again when they're 70 years old, they're probably going to have about the same set of problems. But that doesn't happen in house churches, because you begin to focus in on those things and get down to the really basic things. Maybe something traumatic happened to you when you were 3 years old, and that gets really deeply ingrained. But in a house church, you get personal attention, and so you have the solutions there. And there's also a great deal of adventure, because it's not just a happy face club. You're actually concerned with reaching out to the community. I would love to see Canada be the spearhead for the entire Western world in leading the kingdom and the development of the kingdom in new things, reaching out and growing. We think, although there's nobody keeping track of the statistics, that in the U.S. we might have had 2,500 house churches last year, and by the end of this year it might be 5,000. And so it's growing very, very fast. And I know you can do the same thing here in Canada.
But you're talking about even going beyond, because many churches, probably the majority of viewers watching our program today, take part in some kind of home church setting, either whether it's a weekly Bible study, or whether it's a small group, or whether you even call it home church.
Yeah, about 85% of the churches in the West have tried cell programs, at least. A cell is a subdivision of the central church, and so on Tuesday night or Saturday morning or something, people are out there doing a lot of the things that you do in a house church. But come Sunday morning, they're expected to be back in the pew again and be part of the decor and the budget and
right.
all that sort of thing. And so it's not really turning them loose. When you start a house church, you put your hand on somebody's head and bless them to go out and start whole networks of house church, not just one, but expanding network of house churches. And they're independent. They have their own weddings, baptisms, and funerals, their own leadership. And so God is able to lead them in directions that are maybe not quite like what their parent church looked like.
But what about if you don't have a full-time pastor? I know that there are probably some people who are saying, well, doesn't that lead to anarchy? Isn't there mass confusion?
No,
you need that full-time pastor keeping the troops in line.
No, we have a full-time everybody. Everybody is 24/7. You know, if the pastor doesn't come really well prepared in a traditional church, a legacy church, then he'd be standing up in the pulpit winging it, and pretty soon he's circulating his resume someplace. But the laymen have a free ride. They can come extremely ill prepared, and just, you know, as long as you can hold down a pew cushion for 90 minutes and move your mouth when the singing is going on, you've parred the course. But in the house church, you're thinking all week long, what can I bring to the saints next Sunday or whenever they meet? And so it's a high involvement kind of a thing. As Marlene Dietrich once said, it's the friends you can call at 3 in the morning that matter. And that's what we have here. So if you've got a problem, I've got a problem, because we share in those things. We cover for each other. We work with each other and do all sorts of stuff with each other while still trying to remain focused on the outside, on the needy people, and so forth.
You can see why in other places around the world where we're seeing the exponential growth of Christianity that we talked about yesterday, something like an 8% increase, which is just absolutely massive.
Oh, yeah.
You can see when you have that kind of explosive growth, why you would need to go to the house church form of organization, because you can't wait to put, if the whole village is coming to the Lord and becoming followers of Jesus, you can't wait to put up a church, because they need to get together right now, and when you have that kind of growth. What about in North America, though, where we're not seeing, unfortunately, that exponential growth?
Well, you have to get small to grow big. If you have a church with 1,000 people, your chances of having 2,000 a year from now are pretty small. I mean, you really have to have some tremendous growth there. But if you have a group of 10 people in a living room, it's nothing to grow to 20 by the end of the year. So to grow big, get small. I use sometimes the example of an elephant or a rabbit. If you took 2 elephants, a boy elephant and a girl elephant, and stuck them in a closet, very big closet, of course, under ideal conditions, a year later, or 3 years later, actually, with their gestation period and everything, you'd have 3 elephants. But if you took a mommy rabbit and a daddy rabbit and put them in a closet, same thing, you'd have...
a couple weeks later.
No, 3 years later, under ideal conditions and all that, you would have, I believe it's 487 million rabbits. So that's what we're trying to do, is have a rabbit church where we can grow and reach out to people.
When did you discover this? When did you become so involved in this concept of open Christianity?
Well, the whole thing has pretty much evolved since 1985 or 1990. Up until then, the only house churches were kind of groups of rebels and dropouts sitting around licking their wounds and sharing stories about how hurt they'd been by the traditional church. That sort of negativism has almost disappeared. It's maybe 10% of the total now. Mostly house churches are really positive, and they're growing because they are positive and they're reaching out.
How has it changed you, though, this whole process?
Well, I've participated in sharing groups for a long time, going back into college. So it's kind of hard for me to separate at what point it changed, because I've been in sharing groups since, I guess, 1948, which tells you something, doesn't it?
When you look at what you've been able to document, when you look at the miracles that are just mind-boggling that are happening today, when you see the explosive growth in the church around the world, what does that tell you about what's coming?
Well, what's coming is that about 10 or 15 years from now, you're going to see twice as many people meeting in small groups as you do in church buildings. And that's not just my numbers, those are the numbers of people who know, statisticians. George Barna is coming out with a book called Revolution in another month from Tyndale House, and that will say the same thing, roughly, except his date is 20 years from now. But we're seeing an enormous shift toward interaction and personal responsibility and evangelism, and really a total upgrade of the average Christian.
James Rutz, I want to thank you so much for being with us for the past couple of days. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure being here.
This I know, for the Bible tells me so.
Simple church is not Honey, I Shrunk the Church. It's rather a family.
It becomes much more of a family. And if the needs are such that family isn't the theme for this week, you shift into being a hospital. If somebody's really got a severe problem of some sort, you sort of shut everything down, take care of the immediate problem. Sometimes you cycle into it being a school because there's teaching that needs to happen. And sometimes, hopefully, you cycle into being an army.
House church, or sometimes we use the word simple church, does not mean simply meeting in a home. It's a far deeper and more serious revolution than that. What it means is a shift in the way you think about church. I grew up in traditional church. I was a traditional church pastor. And what we saw as church really was the result of a program that you implemented in the context of a meeting. House church is far more than that. First of all, it really is a family. It's a family relationship. And so therefore it's a 24/7 kind of relationship that you enter into with a group of people. Now you meet together, but it's not limited just to meetings. Secondly, it's way more than a program. In fact, we kind of jokingly say a program is what you do when you don't know how to listen to Jesus. Because the foundational element of house church is that Jesus is present. I mean, every believer believes that, says that. Jesus said whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name that he would be present. But what does that really mean? I think it means that he wants to be the head of his church.
Simple church is a way of living. It has nothing to do with coming together in one sense. Though it has gatherings, though people do gather, and though there's a commitment to that regularly, the reality of simple church is the idea of living out the life of Christ in the midst of the people on a regular basis. So it starts with the concept of where 2 or more are gathered, and Jesus Christ is in their midst. And it literally invades every aspect of life.
People, when they think of the word church, they think of a building with a steeple on it, and that's not what church is. Church is God's people involved in doing God's business. And it has nothing to do with the form or the structures or the buildings that are around.
And that's why God created us, first to have intimacy with Him and then with each other. So that's really the church, is relationship and to have community.
Church in the New Testament really was a small group of people intimately connected with one another, probably meeting in a home, and not reduced just to a meeting, but really a whole lifestyle.
Simple church is a gathering of believers who are in the pursuit of God among the company of friends. And our goal in coming together is to say, Lord, here we are. What do you want us to do? And every church gathering, every gathering of the ecclesia will be different. Some days it's going to be just prayer. Some other time it's going to be teaching. God's doing something that needs to be taught, something that needs to be corrected, and someone's going to teach. Another time you're just going to worship and enjoy God. Every meeting doesn't have to be the same. It just has to be real.
Secondly, they were sharing life, not an hour. Life means you share material blessings, you share spiritual blessings, and you do this all the time, and there's nobody who does it for you. Everybody does it with each other.
You know, if you walk in with a problem and you walk out with the same problem a couple hours later, the group has failed.
You know, there's been times that in my business I've had slow periods. You know, I was a general contractor, a builder, and we'd have good times, we'd have slow times. And, you know, the church was always there to provide. And whatever my need was, they would cover it.
I couldn't drive because my head was swimming, and for a day or two I was even nauseated as well. But I knew that my home church people, they would help. And so I went Sunday night, someone took me, picked me up and took me to one of the other members, and then I shared the problem. And I believe it's really right to say every member over the next hour or day, week, actually offered to help me in different ways.
A lady was going to lose her home. She was in the middle of a divorce and she could not care for her home. So everybody dropped their Bibles and picked up a hoe and a rake and went over and spent the whole day tending to her home, cleaning, painting, washing, cutting, mowing, all of those things. And at the end of the day, we celebrated together around a communion table, a meal that we shared together to honor the Lord and to thank Him for the privilege of service that day. In responding to the leading of the Lord, this group went in and lived out the message of Christ that day.